Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I'm really delighted to have our friend Gabino Iglesias with us this afternoon. We're going to be talking about all of his books, but in particular, the reissue of these wonderful two books, Zero Saints and Coyote Songs. Zero Saints hit about a month ago, and maybe a little bit more than that. And then Coyote Songs is just now coming out. So it's got to be Gabino. First of all, welcome. It's great to see you again.
Hello, Patrick. Excited. I was sad because reissues don't get we don't get a tour. And as you know, Poison Pen is a part of every book that I've had so far. So yeah, I'm stoked to be here talking to you. Glad to see you haven't melted yet. I hope you're on the AC today.
Well, it's funny. We were just talking before we went live about the extreme heat, and last week my home AC went out, and when it was that day, it happened to be about 115. And when it's that hot, especially if you have animals like I do, it becomes an emergency real fast.
It does. It does. Yeah.
Yeah,
I changed the when summer really starts, I changed the dog walk to 9, 10 p.m. uh
yeah,
because it's hot for them. They burn their paws
for sure.
walking on the streets when you're crossing. So yeah, you have to give it a couple hours to, make it manageable for them. So I'm glad everyone's safe.
Everyone's safe again. Yeah. I mean, when it's like 95 degrees at 10 p.m., it gets a bit oppressive after a while.
Yes.
But yeah, no, it's so great to see the reissue, and Mulholland's done a gorgeous job with them both. It's got to be gratifying to see these back in print, isn't it?
It's an amazing feeling. I always called Zero Saints the little book that could, because it came out. It was the first time that I wrote Barrio Noir inside a book. It was the first time that I was using as much Spanglish as I wanted. It was the first book that I did, serious events for. It launched my career in France. I think he played a big deal in getting me an agent. And it was also the first book of mine that my editor, Josh Kendall at Mulholland, read. So when we finally met, he was like, you've sort of been on my radar since this book. And so when we talked about bringing them back, and they had this idea of just going with the red and green, kind of like the Devil Takes You Home, so that they would all look like family. Um, and they're back out. They've been out of print for like a year and a half, 2 years, and yeah, I'm stoked. And it's been so long that they are new books to most of my readers. So yeah,
Right.
no one read them the first time around. So I got a whole bunch of people now that can check them out.
Now, I have a question for you. It said, it says on the promotion for Zero Saints that this is your first novel, but
Yeah.
it's actually your third, isn't it?
So it was technically the second, uh, but the first book that I ever published, Gut Mouth, in 2012, I believe was about 28,000 words or 26,000 words. So
A
I'm
novella.
guessing they called it a novella, and this was my first novel, which I still think is pretty short for a novel, considering the last two are like 350-page plus books, and these ones are 20 to 30 to 10. I can't remember, but they're short novels.
I really like that. I like the broader canvas as well, of course, but
Yeah.
you can tell why the French love these. I mean, this is like the perfect, length for
Yeah.
a short novel.
And we're fighting against social media and Netflix and all the other distractions. So I do enjoy the 600-page brick with all the world building that just sucks you in.
Yeah.
And when it comes to like horror and sometimes sci-fi and crime fiction, Jim Thompson wasn't writing, 400, 500-page novels. So it was just go in, boom, get it done, and walk out. So I do enjoy them short.
Aren't I know you are fascinated with kind of pulp paperbacks and
Yeah,
that whole era of storytelling. You know, get in, get out, and you get the sense with a lot of those guys. I mean, the vast majority of them are not remembered today,
yeah,
but people like Goodis and Jim Thompson and some of those guys. Can you imagine walking into your drugstore in the 50s and
yeah.
finding a copy of The Killer Inside Me
Yeah,
and
for about 10 cents.
and
Yeah.
taking it home and saying, "Oh my God, what have I gotten myself into here?"
Yeah. What is this? Why is this so dark? I didn't know you could do that. But yeah, it's I think the pulp era, the way that we use that word, we used that word for a long time was sort of an insult. It
Right.
was capital L literature.
Disposable.
Yeah, disposable, just throw away paperbacks. And I think now a lot of folks have embraced the speed and the action and the violence of pulp. And they use that aesthetic, and then suddenly it's very profound, very political, very important novellas that are just shooting people in the face every couple of pages. So you get that mix of really important work that's being done, and then it's also pulp. And I think that marriage is beautiful.
It's really interesting, because you get the sense that, a lot of these guys, there was probably not a whole lot of time for an editorial oversight. And you get the sense that these guys, especially like Goodis and Thompson, were just sort of pursuing their own personal demons
Yeah.
on the page.
And then you
Very,
read crazy stuff about their production. It was just like they were machines. They were
yeah,
You might read a novel now, and some of them have not aged well, and maybe there are parts where some passages you're like, you could have rewritten this to be much better, but then you go online, it turns out that they banged out 5, 6 novels that year. So it's
right.
like you get a pass for the week, couple of paragraphs that you had in there because you wrote this thing in 2, 3 months and then got it published. So yeah,
That
hat
whole,
off
that
to them.
whole, yeah, and that whole era, especially going back even further of the pulp magazines, that era before television when, a lot of these writers were having to follow the market. And so they would do Westerns, fantastic, speculative stories, detective stories. I find that just fascinating.
Yeah.
Joe Lansdale reminds me of kind of a modern version
Yes.
of somebody who does, Joe well too. Um, you know, kind of the Mark Twain of our generation, really.
Yeah, what does Lansdale write? He writes Joe Lansdale books, and that's
That's
it.
right.
It could be a serious family drama or a Western about zombies, and it's all good. So it's
Yeah,
Joe, national treasure.
if anybody watching doesn't know his work, go seek it out.
Yes.
He is a national treasure, as are you, Gabino. And this is a perfect segue to get into talking about your work. And one of the, you know, I confess I'd never read Zero Saints until the
No one
reissue.
did. You're good.
And no, but I was struck right away, by the voice. I mean, just from the very beginning, the voice just hits you. And I guess as a way of an entry point of talking about it, um, how did you develop your voice? Was it something that you had from the very beginning? You had the voice talking to you, or like a lot of writers, good writers, they start out by imitating the writers that they admire, and then along the way, they drop some of that and their own voice emerges.
I don't think I was ever the kind to imitate. In fact, whenever I used to read something that really left a mark, I would immediately think I have to find a way to create the same feelings in my way, because otherwise you run into that thing where for years people try to write like Lansdale or
Joe Thompson.
Hemingway or right, you read a silly line somewhere about muscular prose, and then you're like, oh, I'm gonna write like Charles Willeford for my first few books. My journey was a little different because I think the voice was there from the beginning, but I understood that I had to take time and translate everything because some of it was coming to me in beats and pieces of Spanish. Only started writing in English in 2008, and by the time I got to this book, I had written Gutmouth and a very messy 130,000 word PI supernatural novel.
Mhm.
And then after spending a year writing that thing, and it was so massive and it was messy, I thought I need to write something to find that voice, but also the anti 130,000 PI novel that I wrote. So let me start with violence and then speed it up from there, never slow down. And that means when a character is talking and it comes to me in Spanish, I'm not going to stop myself, translate the whole thing, and then write it. I'm just
Yeah.
going to let that thing flow. And so suddenly it was slightly easier to write than when I was making that part go away constantly. So it was the voice that was there that was trying to come out, and I was saying, no, we need to translate anything, and then if we ever put anything in Spanish, it has to be in italics. And one day I just got tired after those first two books entirely in English and just went for it. And I think it worked because it was the one that finally got published a little better and got translated and stuff. So yeah, if there's any writers listening, just listen to the little voice and go with what the little voices tell you.
Right. I love the kind of integration of both because it seems really appropriate because in this, especially in this book, because we're inside the head of a character. We're first person, present tense for this character, Fernando in Zero Saints. And his internal monologue is this interesting mix of both languages. And
Yeah,
so that comes across and it seems really appropriate. And it's kind of nice, you make us gringos, look up some words here and there. I mean, I know enough Spanish usually to get the context of what is said
right.
in the Spanish passages, but I like how you just have them there and you don't like you don't say, in other words, what he was trying to say is blah blah blah, that you don't give us the English translation. I really admire that, and it's kind of a gutsy move, I'm sure.
It is. It was as soon as I started getting reactions to the Spanish and yeah, you worked a lot on context, but still you're writing for an American market and all that stuff. I kept thinking, how many times have I forgotten a word in conversation or while teaching? And how many times have I seen other folks who are bilingual suddenly get asked something and you get that deer caught in the headlights. So if I can put readers who only have one language in those shoes for like a brief couple of lines, like this isn't for me. I don't feel comfortable. What's going on? I have to struggle to understand. I feel out of place. It's sort of like, welcome. This is life for a lot of us. Like you're doing an interview, you forget a word in English, and then you're starting to talk to yourself about I'm looking like an idiot right now, which prevents you from remembering the word.
Hmm.
So yeah, I want people to be slightly uncomfortable and struggle a little bit and understand that for a lot of people that's daily life. We
Sure.
live in between languages and cultures, and you do have a switch that works 99.9% of the time, but from time to time it's just not there. You're tired or you're stressed out and the switch doesn't flip and then you're stuck. So he's like, yeah, I want folks to feel a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit out of place.
I remember when All the Pretty Horses came out, and you know, Cormac McCarthy got all this grief for having
Yeah,
so much Spanish in the novel. And he
yeah.
did the same thing. He didn't explain himself.
Didn't explain, didn't translate.
He's just
Uh,
like, all right, readers, catch up or get left behind.
yeah, and I think that's something he did his entire career. Like
Yeah,
I don't feel like using quotations right now, and it's like
right.
through all your rules, and in exchange, he got a massive career, millions of readers, and a Pulitzer. So kind of worked out, right? So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, are you familiar with I mean one of my favorite writers has always been Paco Ignacio Taibo.
Bible, yeah. Yeah.
The two. His father was also
Yes.
a writer and artist. Um, but I had the great pleasure of meeting him in El Paso
Nice.
many years ago for one of the Boucher Cons. He was the international, I took all my books and he signed them and stuff. But he gave some presentation, and of course, the Coca-Cola and omnipresent cigarette is real. But he was talking about, he's like, yeah, it's too early in the morning for me to think in English. And so he had a hard time. He had a hard time doing it.
Yeah, no, he's a fantastic novelist, and a nonfiction writer,
Yeah.
journalist, political writer, essayist. I wrote a short piece about him for Crime Reads a couple years ago because
Oh, really?
a little Spanish compendium, sort of like omnibus of all the PI novels. And I was like, this is whatever our American legends did for cities like New York and
Mm.
LA. I think Paco Ignacio does for Mexico, and it's must read. So I'm super stoked to know that you're a fellow fan.
Yeah, and sorry to keep everybody watching. Sorry to keep mentioning other writers, but yeah, no, he's a real. The idea of having a detective in a city, which at that time was like 75%, I think they estimated of the crime originated within the police department,
Yeah,
having a detective. And now, look where we are today. But
yeah.
uh, yeah, so let's get a little bit into Zero Saints. Tell us who is the character Fernando, your protagonist in this book?
There was a moment where I was thinking about how I wanted to tell this story, where I had been living in the U.S. for a while, and I kind of realized that there are certain parts of the South, and I love the South. I came here 2008, and never left. But there were parts where Colombia, Puerto Rico, my home country, Venezuela, they don't exist. Like if you're slightly brown and you come from south of the border, you're Mexican. They only know Mexican food. They only know Mexican jokes. So you get sort of, your identity gets thrown in with those. And I also kind of wanted to talk a lot about navigating different cultures and being thrown into a different language. But my story was not as compelling as I could make it because I had a huge gift at the moment that I was born. They gave me a US passport. And it was like, all right, so you're second class citizens who can't vote because you were born in a colony. But the doors are open. You can come to the US. You don't need a work visa. So all the stuff that your friends suffer from, you don't have that. You have this huge benefit
Hmm.
um, of that blue passport. And I wanted to complicate things further. I wanted to go to that place where you don't have the power of that blue passport and that identity. So it was just let me talk about my own experience, throwing myself into a different culture. It went, I think I had been once to Florida before my trip here, maybe twice to New York City, and then I just went from that to living in Texas full time, and trying to write here. And that was, yeah, I was angry about a lot of things, and I found a voice that allowed me to say a lot of those things, as if it wasn't me. So it worked out in the end because they think it's him talking. So that works.
So, okay, so Fernando, that makes a lot of sense actually. So Fernando in the book, when we meet him, um, what's his deal? He's working for this guy Guillermo, who,
Goalkeeper guy, he's running. He's running. Aren't we all? He's running from something. And so he's forced. He doesn't want to. He's forced to come into the country illegally just to stay alive. And he's working for this guy. And when you work for shady people doing shady things, there's a high probability that stuff's gonna go south at some point. And why tell you all the story leading up to that point? The novel opens with him getting knocked in the back of the head and thrown into the back of a car, and off we go for you to witness a torture and beheading just to send a message to you and to your boss. So I wanted to start with the action. You can listen to him whine and tell you the story about what went south in the in Mexico. That comes out later. But yeah, he's here undocumented, trying to carve out a living, trying to stay in the shadows while also making a little bit of money. And when you don't have papers, unless you can work in certain places, then the only option you have left is a little bit of crime. So
The shade trade.
yeah, exactly. That's a good term.
Um, so yeah, and one of the things I want to get into with both books and with all of your work really, is there's this kind of what do I want to say? Violence and religion and the spiritual dimension, the occult, they're natural partners in a lot of ways. Um, and the saints of the title, Fernando, he prays to La Santa Muerte, female saint, interestingly,
Yeah.
and talk a little bit about that, kind of how the saints work in this world, and our antagonists, they're praying to a much older god. Um, is it Ogun?
Lagoon, yes.
Yeah, blood
Yeah, Indonesia.
sacrifices. There's
Uh,
this real interesting psychedelic kind of spirituality to these books,
yeah,
at least the way I read it.
yeah. There's a you asked earlier about influential voices. I ended up studying journalism because at one point I just wanted to be Hunter S. Thompson. Like I wanted to be that guy. And at some point I realized that the brutal honesty uh, that he used when writing about politics, as well as drinking and drug consumption. I was like, that's what sort of makes it his own. So if I'm not doing the drug and fueled, a wild political on the road dreams, I'm bringing in my culture. And so my culture has some of that wildness. So I'll just be completely honest about it and accepting of all faiths. The Caribbean is sort of like the epicenter of the world in terms of that wonderful mix of culture and violence and politics and religion. And I never missed it because he was always around. He surrounded me for what almost 27 years. Then when I left, I missed it. I was like, I didn't realize that if my grandma lived in this country, she'd be considered a witch. Um, I know that in gut we trust because it's even printed on the money. But I know there's people that do other religions. So I'm going to embrace Santeria, brujeria, spiritism, palo mayombe, voodoo. I'm going to embrace all of the stuff that I grew up surrounded by and throw them into the books. And then because he was so much a product of Mexico, the border, and the US, and the entire novel was there. I'd been obsessed with Santa Muerte for about a year and a half by then. And just like the figure that the criminals pray to. And I was like, wow, that's the depth of that spirituality is not, please God help me get into this, get this job that I really wanted. No, it's like, dear Santa Muerte, I will do this for you. Just please don't let me catch a bullet to the head tonight while I go do this thing. Like the level of faith is a little different. And I wanted to bring that to the page. Like there are people who live like that sort of. I don't have money to, buy a vest. So I have prayers. I have prayers in my faith and a gun, and off I go. And I'm hoping for the best. So, you know, uh, I wanted to have that. I wanted that to be at the center of the book, not just the guns.
Yeah, no, it's very powerful. Please, Ogun, accept this blood sacrifice I'm making. And what he, yeah. And then there's also this notion, which is really important actually, about the spirits of people who have violent deaths,
Yeah.
uh, they tend to stick around. They're close by. They're
I
not at
think that's
rest.
it's the first thing that we sort of learn as kids about ghosts. It's a heartbroken person or someone who was tortured and then they stick around for vengeance. And then every single movie that we watch, a horror movie that we watch growing up sort of reinforces that. Like, sure, there's Casper, there's some friendly ghosts here and there, some helpful spirits. But that thing howling near the closet at your home at 2:30 in the morning, it's not a happy spirit. And my love for horror was telling me this has to be here because all those violent deaths cannot just poof and mean nothing. So there's so
Right.
much anger and so much energy there. So put it in the book.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same thing about animals, uh, the spirits of animals, but I don't want to
Yeah.
go too far off into the weeds talking about that kind of thing.
Well, that book does have some dogs with human eyes. So I think
Yes,
there's
for sure. Um, let's see here. Yeah, and so yeah, one of the things I wanted to get into a little bit was the book is set in Austin,
yeah,
and a lot of people assume that Austin, it's not a border town,
yeah.
not quite, and that it's safe, and that it's not. But as you show in the book, that would be a false assumption. Austin has a darkness just like any other big city.
It's a funny relationship because it's definitely not the border. Um, but same thing with Houston. It's not a border town. The border has its own identity. Um, and then there are versions of it wherever you go. I spent sort of like going to Coyote Songs now a little bit, but I spent a lot of time working with undocumented folks in Austin, and I taught at Progresso School for 2 years. Conversational English to undocumented workers who just wanted to get a better job, or in many cases, they sort of aspired to a position where they were like the liaison between those who couldn't speak the language and the bigger bosses at wherever they worked. Um, and it was like, all right, so this is not, we're not getting people hung from you know lampposts. There's not chopped up bodies showing up on the streets. There is a very big community of people here, and each of us brings something, and every culture has its own sort of brand of crime. Whenever you are from one place and you get to another place, you tend to band it together. That's how you get the mafia and the five families in New York. It's like we came from Sicily, from other places. It's a community, and we
Right.
just take care of each other. And that was important to get there, that this is not raids and people crossing back and forth every day. It's also not further up north. It's Austin. We're close. We have a lot of people who are brown. We have a lot of people who speak Spanish as a first language, and we have a lot of folks who are not documented, which is a hot topic. But they deserve to be here and look for an opportunity to do whatever it is they need to do to improve their lives. So
To
I wanted
survive.
all of that in there. And I never lived on the border, so it was much easier for me to talk about the experience of folks in Austin and than it was to talk about folks on the border.
Now, with the cartels, do the Los Zetas still control everything in Austin, or
I haven't looked at reports in a while. I don't know exactly what's been happening since Austin became sort of the center of technology and we got Google and a bunch of stuff. Downtown changed a little bit. For a while, I think there was Zetas, a sort of Mexican mafia, folks coming in, sort of MS-13 type gangs from other places who were either trying to take over or doing the very dirty work for everybody else. A little bit of Mexican syndicate, and then we had Haitians coming in. We had Puerto Ricans doing their thing. I met someone from Florida who told me there were a few Latin kings in Austin. So I think we've spread the love all over, and I wouldn't know who's actually controlling the whole city right now because it's changed so much in the last
Yeah.
10 years.
Didn't you mention that Federacion was also there?
Federation, yeah. We
Yeah,
got them all, yeah.
got them all.
Dallas has more. Dallas is like every single Brown gang plus like, Tango Blast, and probably Dallas has like 4 or 5 thousand members of the Aryan Brotherhood. So it's like things that you wouldn't expect to find in Texas. We definitely have them in those big
It's a
cities.
it's a Benetton of criminality.
Yes, yeah, yeah. We got all of them. You know,
Um, so anyway, yeah, let's get into Coyote Songs a little bit. There's so much to talk about with both of these books, but your character in Zero Saints is kind of caught in the middle of this power grab of a group of MS-13 guys that are trying to kind of come up and take control and some of it away from the Zetas. And Fernando finds himself caught in the middle of all of that. And you know the cartels. Before we move on to Coyote Songs, there's almost this very theatrical, like almost operatic sensibility about them, at least in the way that they stage their violence, uh,
right.
like something we've never seen before. I mean, it's
I
it's
I thought about I had terms in my head. One of them was the choreography of violence,
yeah.
and it was because I was studying violence on paper, and then I realized that a lot of the violence that I loved came from watching movies.
Mm.
And so Jackie Chan movies and Donnie Yen movies and war movies and what they could show you in a minute, any war movie that's well done, the choreography of violence that you can intake in a single minute, you can't write. If you try to write down a Donnie Yen fight that's 2 minutes long, it'll take you like 30 pages of, and then he blocked this kick, and then he threw this punch, and then it just becomes boring and repetitive. So I had to borrow your wonderful word. I had to find a way to stage that violence where if a woman attacks a bunch of people with a machete on a stage, it not only does it make sense, but you can actually see it. And I don't have to describe every single swing and every spurt of blood like a Tarantino movie. I can keep it a little bit more compact and give you just as much um, significant violence that actually means something in a much shorter space. There was a lot of trying that in Coyote Songs. And I have what I want to do, and it's too long. How can I cram it? How can I cut from it? How can I get rid of all that fat and grizzle and stuff, in order to make it also like a short book that was very, very active and moved at a good pace. Also, I realized when writing when I was writing the violence in Zero Saints, it was sort of, no one's waiting for this book. I'm trying what I think is my voice for the first time. If I don't sell it, I already have a few books that I haven't sold. First one that I wrote in English never sold. So it doesn't matter. With Coyote Songs, it was like, now it kind of matters because I know what makes people angry. And I have to do that more. I have to do it more violently now. So I have to bring more types of violence, and hopefully they tie in with my politics. And so that mix will hopefully make a lot of more people angry. And it did. So I got that one. I put all the violence in there, mix it with the politics, and try to make it as lyrical and as poetic as possible because I was starting to get those comments about, well, you're not a real writer because you're doing this pulp thing, which is like horror and crime. And I knew that I had some writing chops that I wanted to flex there. Obviously, whatever I had back then is grown because with every book you strive to get better. But this I wanted to have bigger, better, more poetic violence in Coyote songs than I did in Zero Saints, where I was just trying out how much will publishers and editors and readers allow me to get away with. And the
Yeah, I
answer
mean,
was, yeah,
the basic structure of Zero Saints is, not, it's fairly straightforward, classic kind of setup in many ways, just with a different kind of overlay. We get into Coyote songs, and now we're in totally different situation. It's
yeah,
what I guess you'd call it a mosaic
yeah.
novel. Do you consider it a novel, or do you consider it a collection of shorts?
So this is a super funny question. I was always writing a novel in my head
Mhm.
when it was done, and I had all the chapters. Uh, the only my only goal, once I had written all of those six characters' stories separately, was I want this to work together somehow. So there was a lot of shuffling
They
back and
all they all they kind of
right,
come
exactly.
together like sinew almost.
Exactly. And then I was trying to find a thing that would communicate to people this is a novel. Now, we just talked about something that I think I pulled off. Now we're talking about something I think I didn't really pull off that well. Um, the mother sort of emerges from the sands after the death in the desert, and her words, angry words, are the thing that kind of ties the whole thing together.
Mm,
Um, I was hoping that people would pick up on that. A lot of people did, a lot of people did not. And
mm.
then it got a Bram Stoker nomination in the collection category. And I was like, you know what? If people want to read this as a
I'll
collection,
take it.
I'll take it. I'll take it. So I wrote it as a novel. Some folks say it feels like a collection of somewhat related stories. As long as they're reading it, I don't care what they call it. So it's
Yeah,
fine for me.
yeah. I mean, I like the. I'm trying to think of there are some novels like or what would you consider Winesburg, Ohio, or something like that by
Right.
Sherwood Anderson. This interesting thing where the town is really the lead character,
Yeah.
and you're
And the
getting all
setting
these.
and then everything.
Yeah, yeah. Faulkner did that a lot too. Lots of people have.
Yeah.
Um, but I love the structure of this is so interesting because you have these, what are there, six? Pedrito, the mother, the coyote, Jaime, Alma, and La Bruja. And La Bruja gets the last word, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Um, but those are given, if I did the math right, those are given four separate shorts on the page. Was that always the structure you went with, or is that just how it turned out?
It's literally how it turned out because I thought at the beginning, I thought I can probably just drop because I wrote each one separately.
Mhm.
And then I said, I can just do a book in six parts and that will make sense. But then I realized that they were too short taken together, so you didn't get a sense of time passing by. It was just like it started, it ended. It started again, it ended again. And I didn't like it. I didn't like just ending and then starting again, and you get to know these characters, and then they're gone, or the story's over, or they die.
Mhm.
And I was like, what if I shuffle them? And
Yeah.
so I started doing the shuffle, and then I didn't go by number. I went by if I'm reading and I keep one character in mind. At any point, if I start forgetting about that character, that means I need another chapter from that POV. And then at the end, it turned out that my chaos became very organized. So it was like, oh, if I do this rhythm, and I keep the chapters short, I don't give readers the chance to forget about anyone. So it's like boom, boom, boom. This kind of works as a rhythm. And then I realized that it seemed very organized and purposeful, but it took me weeks of how the hell am I going to do this and shuffling them around. And then they sort of found their own order. So if that worked, it's because it's because I'm an idiot and I tried 100 different things and then finally one of them clicked. So I
Well,
cannot
but
take responsibility for that.
yeah, I'm really glad you just explained that because, in what is it, 150 pages does it turn out to be? You get 160, well, around 160 anyway. But reading it and by delaying each of those pieces, it gives you the not the illusion, but it gives you the sense of much a larger story.
Yeah.
It's kind of ingenious how you did that.
Yeah, and then there are at least one character who's let's just put it this way, their participation ends sooner than everybody else's.
Right.
And so it doesn't feel like an ending because okay, this character's life ended, but I still got book to go. So the story continues, right? The plot wasn't just this character. This character is just part of something much bigger that's still going on. So yeah, hopefully readers get that feel. It's like every little end within the novel is not the end of the whole thing. You can keep reading and then get to the real end.
How did you happen to zero in on these six voices?
Uh, I had I had written an essay for Luna Luna magazine about my thoughts on being an artist from another place, writing in a different language, and I always knew that I wanted to have a character in a novel who's very violent, but whose the center of their life was art. And that was Alma. And Alma was there from the beginning because I knew that I had this essay that I wanted to turn into fiction somehow. I was thinking a lot about I just become a father, so I was thinking about fatherhood a lot, and then I realized fatherhood, in many cases, and I know there's a bunch of great dads out there who do all the work, and they clean, the baby's butts, and they do kitchen work, and they do all of it. But the traditional Latino macho culture, fatherhood is just like you show up for one night, you do the work, you either stick around or you don't. In many cases, you work so much outside of the house that you're not a present figure. So the thing that was really complicated was motherhood. Motherhood was a whole
Mm.
different ball game. But I didn't know anything about that. So I spent 6 weeks, 6 months, sorry, doing in-depth interviews with friends of mine who were moms or were pregnant at the time. And so I had the mother, and the mother was also a character that was whispering in my ear constantly, not only about stuff about motherhood and how difficult it is and how painful it can be, but also saying, "Are you good enough to write women? Can you pull that off?" Because
I mean, for all the muy macho stuff in the culture, it's
yeah,
definitely matriarchy all the way through, right?
yes, yeah,
For sure.
yeah, it's that's you get from beginning to end. So yeah, that was the big challenge with Alma, La Bruja, and the mother. It was like at least I would say more than half of this book centers on women. And I can do violence, I can do horror. Can I write believable, strong women characters that are complex and they're not gonna show up in one of those websites where characters written by men just they breast boobily down the stairs or whatever, and then
Right, right,
everybody
right.
makes fun of that. So I didn't want that. So I spent a lot of time talking to these characters, and then the women came to me first. And then there were other things that I wanted to say that was just easier or better. It felt better for me to say them from the perspective of a man. Like I knew that Coyote had to be a strong man. Who dedicates his life to beating the crap out of children in order to help them stay in the country. And I didn't think putting that in the arms of a woman would be fair because I felt like if I do it on purpose, it's like I'm trying to be, a little extra. It's like, yeah, this is a very complicated story about a coyote who beats the crap out of children. And on top of that, I'm going to make the character of women to sort of push boundaries, and that character just felt like a man to me. So yeah, they all came at different times, and then I realized I'm not writing six novels, or six short stories. I'm writing a story. How does it fit together? That took a while, but then when the Brujas started talking, I was like, okay, now I know. We got our deck of cards. Let's see what comes out.
That's so cool. And let's see. What else did I want to ask you about? Well, obviously set along La Frontera, the border. There's I wrote down a little note, spirits tend to gather at the border, don't
Yeah,
they? I mean, it's got a long history of trauma and violence,
yeah.
and that's what you get into it in a lot of ways in this book, at least the way I read it.
No, yeah, it's borders are there. They're physical borders. I talk about geographical borders, identity borders, language borders. It's things that you come up against that sort of prevent you from flowing forward or from moving to the place where you want to be. And at the same time, all of them are full of holes. Like language is a barrier. When you don't know it, you learn it enough, it becomes a super power tool that allows
Mhm.
you to do things. So I wanted to sort of capture all the elements that can become a border, from geography to art, because Alma is all about like breaking through different kinds of barriers. So it's a book about a lot of fronteras. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a good opportunity to talk a little bit about your own story. I mean, one of the things that comes through after you're reading the introductions, the new intros that you wrote for the book, is you emphasize, hey man, hustle, hustle, hustle. You managed to get this stuff done when there were lots of ways in which you could have come up with excuses not to, you know. Did you always want to be a writer?
Always wanted to be a writer. I just didn't know how that was going to pan out. So I wasted a lot of time. I went to school for business because I thought that was the thing that was going to help me. They whenever they push you to go to college is that whole upward social mobility. So you need to get a real degree. Don't get a degree in art because that doesn't get you a job. So I got my BA in business, but while getting my BA in business at the University of Puerto Rico, um, I was doing stuff with the Spanish department and like writing poetry and publishing short stories and writing journalism for the local newspaper. So at the end of that, I was like, I really want to find a way to turn words into money, but Puerto Rico doesn't really have a publishing industry. So I thought, let me go to law school because lawyers write a lot. And then I wasted 2 years in law school, and then I realized I don't this isn't it. I don't want to do this. Uh, and that was the era of me being obsessed with Hunter S. Thompson. And so I ran away. I crossed literally it's if you're in the law building, you have to cross the entire campus to get to the communications building. And I ran one day and I was like, how can I transfer and study journalism instead? And that worked out fine. I got my MA in journalism in 2 years and started teaching and realized this is why so many professors write novels because it's hard to pay bills with novels right off the gate. So they become professors and then they write. Cracked that code, and I felt like the next step on that code was another degree because every time you get another degree, they pay a little bit more, which means you have a little bit more money that you can use to pay your internet and your electricity, so you can write. So I came to the U.S. to get a PhD at UT Austin and wrote about four books while doing that, and did not enjoy my PhD at all. Finished it because I had to borrow a lot of money to do it.
What,
uh,
what's your PhD in English?
Journalism.
Oh,
Yeah.
journalism. Okay. All right.
Yeah. So never used it for much. Taught a couple of journalism classes, but by the time I was done, I was like, all right, I'm not going to pursue tenure as a journalism professor because what I wanted to do is work as a writer. And yeah, 14 years of that, and then found my agent. Devil Takes You Home. We sold it, and
Yep.
the rest is history. Haven't done any journalism teaching or high school teaching or working construction or anything else since that little book came out.
Right. No. And this, yeah, this was a breakthrough. And e- expanding on, this size, kind of a smaller size novel into a much bigger canvas. Was that a challenge for you, or did you were just ready for it?
I was writing that novel when I was writing The Devil Takes You Home. I was working as a teacher at Idea Montopolis. I was teaching four different classes, ninth through 12th grade. And I was a floater. I didn't have a room, so I had a box that I would carry all my stuff for different classes. Um, I was in no hurry. And when I hit 30,000 words on that book, I realized this is a lot of me being angry at my job and being angry at the healthcare system because I had been here for a while and more than half that time I did not have a job with health insurance. Um, no one's waiting for it. Again, I don't have an agent, I don't have a publisher asking me for a book. So I'm going to let this one take as long as it wants to take. And when I finished, it was the longest thing I'd ever written. It was maybe 85,000 words. And I didn't mean for it to be that long. It's just I felt like the story was going places and I wanted to go with it. So I wasn't like, I need to keep these 200 pages or less. So I just wrote and wrote and wrote. In the middle of that, I um, lost that teaching job to the pandemic, and so it was. I literally have nothing else to do. No one's hiring. I'm not going to spend another hour on Indeed wasting my time. So I convinced myself that if I could fake it and live and wake up in the morning, grab a cup of coffee and write like a real writer, maybe that could work. Also, didn't have insurance after that job, so I didn't want to go out during the pandemic. So it was just in this tiny room, um, listening to dark music and writing. And at the end of that, got me an agent. And then when we turned it in, everything, she helped me with the stuff that needed to be better. And I think it got to like 90,000 words. And I was like, this is like three of the other books. But yeah, let's roll with it. And with House of Bone and Rain, the same thing. I had been thinking about that story for 20 years. So by the time it started coming out, I wanted to do Lovecraftian stuff. I wanted to do friendship. I wanted to do a bunch of characters with their own lives. And
This
didn't
one's back. This one's back home too in Puerto Rico.
That's back home, yes.
Yeah,
So yeah, I think they just got longer because I had a little bit more time to write them.
that's awesome. I always neglect the people that are tuning in. I'm sorry, folks. When I'm flying solo, it's kind of hard to keep track of it. Let's just see if there are any good questions here to ask. Okay, yeah, Russ has a really good question. He says, I asked this of S.A. Cosby, another terrific writer, recently, and now I'm going to ask you, have you ever written a paragraph or a chapter where you said to yourself, nah, this is too violent and too nasty? And he says, I love the rawness of your writing.
Well, thank you for your question. Shout out to Sean, one of the best to ever do it. Also, Sean's my friend, and I love watching Sean become S.A.
Yeah,
Cosby, Barack Obama's probably favorite crime writer. He deserves all of that and more.
yes, it
Um,
is.
no, I actually tend to fight. The few fights that I've had with my editors are there's no there's no too much. There's no going too far. Because if
Mhm.
I tell you about um, a group of men breaking into a prison and yanking a man out of a cell and beating him to a pulp and then hanging him out from a tree and putting 100 bullets in his body and then taking the body down and tying it to a car and dragging it through town, that's called history. That's not crime fiction. That's lynchings in the United States of America. So if history can go into places like that, then I can go into places like that, and as long as I have something that I want to tell you, and I feel like violence is the best way to get my point across, or in some cases my character's point across, there's never too far. Like go read Eric LaRocca, go read Clive Barker. There's never a too far. There's too far for readers.
I'm still
But
traumatized by a bolt cutter that appears in this book. I'll let you
yeah,
discover it if you
ball
haven't
cutter
already.
scene. Yeah, which is the ball cutter scene is funny because my agent was sort of afraid of editors wanting to cut it. So that The Devil Takes You Home, we were very lucky, and it sold at auction. And we met with 7 editors, and when the last 2 editors were, on the table, and we were trying to make that decision, I remembered my interview with Josh at Mulholland, and I said, "How do you feel about the toe?" And he got all serious and he said, "Well, I actually had an idea. When you do readings, we're going to try to get you flesh-colored jelly beans so you can throw them at the audience." And I remember that part. And then I call Melissa and I'm like, "I'm going crazy trying to make a decision based on the jelly beans. I think we should work with Josh." And
Uh,
we did. So yeah,
Josh is a sick man, huh?
he's a sick man. And then
Yeah.
House of Bone and Rain, he said maybe this guy breaking off a knife in another guy's face is a little too far. It's too gratuitous. And I said, we chopped off a kid's toe. This is two consenting adults trying to stab each other. And he said, fair enough. And then that scene stayed in the book. So it's always a
Two
negotiation.
consenting adults.
Yes.
Um, okay, here's a good one from, and I'm sorry we're running, I guess we're not running over because we started about 10 minutes late. Stefania, a viewer in Italy who's become a friend, she says, Mr. Iglesias, what does horror mean to you? Why do we need to be scared and to get that thrill, in your opinion?
I think that's a amazing question. Shout out to Stefania and to everyone in Italy because you've been embracing coyote songs in your wonderful country. Uh, there's no easy answer. It's a mix of things. Horror to me is absolutely everything. I don't, I Let's go back to the mothers that I spoke with for Coyote Songs. No one comes into the world peacefully. There's screaming and blood involved, and you're crying, and they're yanking you out of your comfort zone. You're either slashing a woman open with a scalpel, or she's being torn in half by a human skull after you've been a parasite for 9 months. That they had to magically grow a new organ just to feed you and protect you. So horror is life. Horror is everywhere.
Sometimes they have to cut you out.
Sometimes they have to cut you out or yank you out, or I mean, you've seen those 1920s kits that they look like a torture thing. So yeah, horror is absolutely everywhere. I think when it comes to horror fiction is first of all, it gives us an opportunity to talk about things that bother us or that mean a lot to us in very powerful ways. Horror fiction is also controlled chaos. If it gets a little bit too much after someone loses a toe, you can close the book and put it down. I cannot close the book and put it down when it comes to the decisions of the Supreme Court. We're all screwed, and there's nothing we can do. We cannot control that. Um, Also, I feel like there's been more than enough scientific proof that people who read horror just develop a talent for empathy. Like if you're reading dark fiction and you don't care about those characters, then the book doesn't work. You don't care about how many people die or how they die.
Yeah.
you do care about them, then you're emotionally invested, and that's the power of horror, to remind us that we care, that we want people to survive, and we want to cheer on the final girl, and we want the restless spirits to finally get some rest. So horror is life, and I think all writers eventually sort of tap into it at some point, even if they
Mhm.
think they're not, because there's violence and suffering and death in most novels that you read, whatever they want to call themselves, crime, literary fiction, sci-fi.
Totally.
There's always a little bit of fear there. So I think horror is absolutely everywhere, and we just embrace it.
Yeah, and these stories aren't new, you know.
No.
They go back to antiquity, you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
And
mean,
it's just
we just went into God We Trust, and then do you know what happened to his son? It was fairly violent, and we based an entire, not one, but many religions in those horrific, awful,
absolutely.
violent, murderous acts. So it's absolutely everywhere.
It's kind of cool though, you know, I mean, obviously like all genres, you know, the crime fiction genre has wide latitude for all sorts of different stories. And you know, horror's the same. And
Yeah,
it's, you know, for a long time there were different trends, you know, like the slasher trend, the this trend. Right now, you know, it's really interesting time. They're finally allowing more stories to be told, different
yeah.
perspectives, and you know, you see a lot of native voices, and you know, tapping into folklore, you know.
Yeah, and folks from every walk of life is telling you, I'm going to tell you a story that you already know, but you've never seen it from my perspective. So
Right.
we don't get tired of haunted house stories or possession stories, because every single writer working right now, I think, is pushing really hard to say a trope can still be awesome if we shape it into something new, and show it to you through a very different lens. And that's why Stephen Graham Jones can write Mongrels, and you go, no, 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 you think you're tired of werewolf novels, but you haven't read this one, and this you'll fall in love with werewolves again. And the people are paying attention, and that's why we have a Silvia Moreno Garcia and a Chuck Wendig and a Paul Tremblay and a Josh Mallerman and a Haley Piper, all of them doing fantastic stuff, all of them doing stuff that if you put it next to each other, you're like, this isn't the same genre. These folks are not even talking about the same universes, and they're all under the horror banner, which also
Yeah.
includes me, and to many degrees includes even S.A. Cosby, because he's always had a passion for it. He goes hard, violent, and dark, and
Mm.
he writes, a short story that's entirely horror now and then. So
Well,
it's
and you know, and of course, like the vampire, you know,
yeah,
legend is constantly being reinvented.
yes,
And I had a great conversation with Richard Lang, your fellow Mulholland
yeah,
writer,
yeah.
and a really terrific writer. And he had a book out a couple of years ago called Rovers, which was
Yeah,
sort of a, you know, band. It's sort of like a hard-boiled noir vampire tale. You
yeah.
know, we
That
had a
doesn't feel like a vampire tale.
no, and we had a really interesting digressive conversation about comparing vampirism, I guess, to like heroin addiction, you know, and how they're very similar in a lot of respects.
Yeah, you get weak and you need that fix.
That's right. Yeah. Well, anyway, it's always such a treat to talk to you, Gabino.
Thank
Um,
you. Always.
last question is, what's next?
I think at the beginning I talked about trying something and then maybe nailing it and knowing this is what I can do right now. So I didn't write House of Bone and Rain for 20 years because I didn't think I had the chops to touch that story yet. So the next one is another mosaic, but I thought this time I have to make it very, very, very clear that it is a single novel, even though I'm going to be focusing on different characters. The solution for that came to me um, as I was driving, and I thought, is it true that every horror writer has to do, like a haunted house story, a werewolf story, a ghost story, a demonic possession story, and that every sort of crime writer wants to do a PI novel and a missing girl and so and so goes back home? I don't know, but I always thought it'd be really cool to do a haunted house story, but I don't know how to make it new. And I was driving and I thought, this is a haunted house novel. Instead of a house, I'll make it a building. And then that gives me it's the same place, everyone's there, so we know it's a novel. But we're going to be inside four different apartments, not six, because I wanted to go in deeper into other stuff. Um, that's too long. Short, short answer. A haunted building novel about the people in four different apartments. Some of them have supernatural trouble, and some of them are just bad people and gun trouble. So that's the next one.
That sounds awesome. Where's it set?
I'm thinking it'll be back here in Austin. I've been using Austin, and I thought this might be my New York novel, because I wanted to have certain elements in there. It talks a little bit about gentrification and stuff, and then I thought, no, I'll come back to Austin. We've had the LA novels and the New York novels more than enough, so back to Austin.
Very cool. Yeah, this
Thank.
whole idea that, buildings or places where, horrific violence has taken place in the past, you know, do they still contain the residue of
Yeah, the
those
bones suck that energy.
My wife and I went to this great hotel, historic hotel out in Douglas, Arizona, right on the border, which, Pancho Villa famously rode his horse into the lobby and went up the stairs. And there were supposed to be ghosts there. It was such a cool experience. I love places like that.
I just remember Paco Ignacio rode like a Pancho Villa.
It's massive.
Yes, I just remember I got that about I don't know, like 2 years ago or something, and I haven't tackled it just
I
because
haven't yet either.
I'm like
He did a
it's
great one on
it's
Che,
oh,
Che
yeah,
Guevara too.
yeah. So that's a project, man. Maybe we should do like a book club, force ourselves to read that because
A year long.
yeah.
No, that whole era just absolutely fascinates me. Yeah. Anyway, thanks everybody for tuning in this afternoon. Thanks so much. Congratulations, Gabino, on the
You.
issue of these two wonderful books.
Yes, sir.
And look forward to seeing you again soon.
Yes.
Yeah,
And the Poison Pen will happily send you books. So
we
this
will.
Prime Week, remember to primarily buy from your local indies.
Ding, ding, ding. Thanks so much.
Thank
Have
you,
a great
Patty.
night,
Really
Gabino.
cool.
Take care.
You too. Turn on the AC.
I will.